So I'd like to bring up our moderator, Will Mayo. He is the CEO and founder of Spoken Layer, and Will's going to be the moderator for this panel. Will, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Let's give it up.
I'd like to introduce each of you by name as you go by.
Let's give it up for Will.
Thanks, Joel.
Entertainment, come on.
So thanks so much. I'm really excited to have this conversation. Something that's really important for me is media and entertainment and what that space is. It's actually something I've been involved in. My family's been involved in for a couple generations. I actually grew up here in the city. My parents were involved in media. My grandparents were involved in media, and always at this interesting change state of media. My grandparents were at the time when black and white television and color television was just coming. My dad was at the transformation as a director and as an entertainer when they were going from analog to digital, and now we're at the space where entertainment is changing again. What is media? How are we consuming it? And who is an audience in media? And I think that's the discussion we want to have today is what is voice media? What does it mean for media and entertainment? And how is it changing the way people are consuming content, interacting content? And what is content when the audience has changed? Because instead of an audience being something you broadcast to like a whole room, it's now one person in voice. There's one person that listens to an Alexa, there's one person that's talking to Siri, there's one person that's interacting with a Google Home, and that totally changes what media is and what entertainment is and how that evolves and what it is. So the arc of the discussion that we're planning to have today is a little bit around what is happening today, how are people using it, and also what should people be doing in the future, and what are honestly the mistakes that we've made. All of us have had some overlap in the media and entertainment segment of what is the voice and audio space. So those are the kind of couple things we want to talk about today. But before we get into it, I'd love to kind of walk down the panel, and if people want to give a brief introduction on who they are and kind of how they intersect with the media world.
Hi, I'm Kevin Cornish. I'm a founder of a company called Conversive. And what we do is we're a conversation engine that creates face-to-face conversations. So imagine you're having get a FaceTime call from a character on a television show, or imagine putting a face on Alexa.
Cool. I'm a composer. I run a company called Man-Made Music. Basically, we refer to ourselves as a strategic music and sound studio. So we take everything we know from film and television scoring and sort of score the rest of the world across entertainment products, theme parks, healthcare solutions, all kinds of different things.
Hi, I'm Allan, Hoving, founder of Pod Poster. I was letters editor of Rolling Stone many years ago, and then when I started listening to podcasts, I wanted to be able to send comments to podcasts. So we created an app that went into the iPhone store, and now I'm trying to bring the commenting ability into the voice-enabled era.
My name is Neuman, and I lead the AI research lab for Comcast. And so part of the responsibility of my team is to use voice, or to give voice to the customer and express the content that you're looking for, and making sure that you can find it as easily as possible. And we also recently started expanding voice to control the home as well as customer service, but here we'll focus on the media and entertainment domain.
Jason Stevens, also with Comcast. I'm product management to Jan's technology. So I've worked on our X1, which is our TV platform, as well as now with our AI and machine learning product group.
Awesome. Well, I want to start where has this come from? Where has media begun, and how did it start that transformation into voice? You know, the first thing that I always think about is radio, and that's the type of storytelling. But I'm curious if anyone has kind of a strong opinion of, I think especially with Xfinity and Comcast, you guys are dealing with a huge pipe of content and kind of bringing voice into an existing pipeline. Joel, you're creating experiences as things are creating new or creating new formats. But does anyone have kind of a story or place they want to start with where the kind of genesis as media has started to move to voice that they kind of want to start with?
I mean, I can start talking about how at Comcast we're thinking about voice. So one of the transition points that we have seen is that traditionally TV, you had a number of channels, right? In the old style TVs, you maybe had 5, 6, 10, 20 different channels. And for that, the traditional remote control was sufficient, right? All I had to do is maybe put in some numbers, or had to just go up and down, right? Once we had cable TV and you had 100+ channels to choose from, you started to have to remember channel numbers, which already started to being painful, right? It was still doable because you pressed on the numbers. But nowadays, we have 100,000 plus items that you can choose from at any given moment of time. And a remote control or traditional input devices are really not working well for that. When we're starting to consume streaming, where we can type in, I'm searching for this title, etc., but it's kind of divorcing it from what we want to do when we consume TV, where we just want to relax, sit on the couch, and watch TV, right? And so voice enabled us to kind of give that functionality back to the users by just expressing what you are looking for, right? So we can kind of often phrase it that kind of we want to allow you to communicate with the TV on your terms, right? Like the limits of the interface shouldn't determine how you interact with the medium, but really kind of change it and empower you to express it how you want to do it.
How long has voice control or voice search have you guys had available to your customer base?
So we've been doing it now for about 3-4 years, right? We started very simple, where all you can do is like you could now say, watch CNN instead of having to remember the number. But now we kind of expanded it all the way to where you can just describe to show me the Seinfeld episode where George became a marine biologist, right? And so it will pull up that episode for you. So really expanding the semantic range to bring it closer to how you would tell another person, hey, have you seen this program? Like, why don't you try it out? And this is like how we want you to be able to communicate to the TV.
Do you think it's changed the way people are accessing content and what content they're finding or discovering?
We definitely see, so like from our own customer interactions, the greatest driver for customer happiness for our consumers is having the voice remote, right? So like there's nothing that makes people want to stay with Comcast as much as having access and using the voice remote. So it really has been a game changer.
That's incredible.
And so by now we're kind of developing pretty much all our TV experiences around using the voice remote.
That makes it easier to get people to invest in it for you, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, and if you think about how quickly it's scaled, like this is something that, you know, was an application available only to employees just a handful of years ago, and now we have 20 million plus voice remotes out there. So it's something that our business really saw as so effective, and it came through in the numbers, where all of a sudden we had this competitive advantage where you couldn't just, you know, switch to another equal cable provider, and it gave us a lot of stickiness there.
So, I mean, Will, if I try to go back to answer your first question, which is what is content?
Yep.
I mean, I think for us, in thinking about entertainment experience, everything's content. Mm-hmm. And I think also the traditional boundaries between what we thought of as storytelling, content, entertainment, product, brand, even experiences and you know, how those experiences get pushed out in different activations. It's like all those barriers are gone. It's all storytelling. It's all about, you know, even products is storytelling. People have such an explosion of choices now. If we don't make each and every interaction that people have engaging, fun, and entertainment experience, then they don't tune in, they choose something else.
Do you think it's why has that changed so? Because I totally agree. In the past couple of years, it's moved so much that, you know, how much of like hashtag storytelling and all this stuff has become. So is it because the technology has changed? Is it because it's cheaper to create content? Is it because it's now just a baseline of requirement? What do you think is the big contributing factor? Why has storytelling become so paramount?
I mean, it's a great question. I think there's probably like 17,000 answers to that. But I just give you like one that we focus on. Look, you know, I'm a composer. You know, what the hell do I know about all this technology? But I've had to get smarter and smarter about technology, mainly because I'm looking at where my audiences are migrating to. People are spending so much. I mean, you look at just mind share and the amount of minutes people spend on technology now. Even in the last 5 years, it's exploded. So if I want to, you know, first of all the television shows that we work on, all the media brands, you know, HBO, even IMAX is now doing experience centers. It's not just about the film experience, which we help score and come up with identity for a lot of the IMAX work. But every single one of these brands, whether they're a media brand or not, they are a media brand now. Every single brand is a media brand. So if that's how people are consuming media, if that's how they're consuming products now, if that's how they're consuming entertainment, then we have to continue to migrate with them. and realize that every single one of those new touch points in technology is really a different manner of storytelling that completely has to be told differently. We need different tools, just like radio and television you were talking about, or theater, or whatever it is. Each one of those has different rules for creativity and trying to get people to feel things. Music and sound is a language of emotions, and we're trying to make people feel things.
Well, and it's interesting because television, they all have a physical representation, and they're actually bounded physically. Like you have a screen, or you have a theater, or you have even an auditorium like this. This is an experience that's bounded. But what's so interesting about whether it's the voice remote or that, it's this unbounded experience, and inherently it's a blindfolded experience. It is a blind experience that can persist anywhere. And I think it's interesting kind of on those macros, and I think what we were talking about earlier, you have these much more intimate one-on-one conversations. How has that, because that is a form of storytelling too, because you're doing mass storytelling but to a very tiny audience.
Yeah, so it all comes from an emotional place where I think a lot of the stuff with voice says, if you think about all the movies you've watched, you've always been watching two people talk to each other, have interactions and have emotions for each other, and then you look at YouTube influencers, and it's all about this thing of talking to my following, but it's talking to. And so the most logical next step would be talking with. You're watching a video, somebody's talking to you. Wouldn't it make sense that you could be able to talk to them and they would be able to respond? So the last experience like this we did was one for 13 Reasons Why, and it was this idea that you're a student at the school, and going to this point about experiences, you're experiencing being inside the world of the story, inside the world of this high school, and all of the drama that all the characters are caught up in, they're sucking you into it. So everything that makes you forget that you're part of this world and makes you feel like you're part of the world that's on the other side of the screen, voice is the most important thing driving that.
Yeah, and this reminds me of something, Allan, you and I were talking about is, people having a voice and an experience. So much of when people consume something, they want to have a response. They want to have say what they feel, and I think that's something that you've had a lot of experience in the more analog world. But how do you think that's going to translate in this large world? There can be so many people that can respond, but have a strong opinion or have a strong piece of feedback.
Exactly. Well, I'm the guy who was always talking back to the TV set. So, hopefully, eventually, everybody will have an experience of being able to, whether it's talking to a character or talking amongst ourselves, like we were citing the example of the Walking Dead program that also has the Talking Dead program. And so wouldn't it be great if we could create follow-on content where the audience gets a chance to speak? And I know that you're starting a little bit of that. Maybe you can tell everybody how. But there is the problem, of the scale and how do you curate this, because, when you look at comments and you look at what's going on Twitter and other platforms, a lot of it is not useful, not helpful, so somebody ultimately will need to curate that and hopefully be able to turn that into something valuable above and beyond just everybody getting their own say.
Yeah.
You're bringing up such a super important point, which is like every interaction with story, every interaction with brands, every interaction with product now is becoming a two-way conversation. And that's if you talk about a game changer from the human being interaction standpoint, from the creative standpoint, from the emotional standpoint, that's the biggest change.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's really interesting is changing is we've been talking about what content, storytelling, but then how are people consuming it? Where are they consuming it? That's a whole other thing that I think has totally changed, because before it used to be a physical radio or in your car, and those were very much locked to physical places. But now there's this interesting blend where there is a physical smart speaker device, but it's also your mobile phone or your whole house is persistent. And there's an interesting thing of how people are consuming content has also changed. It's a persistent session that might start in their home and continue into their car and then go into their office. And how does that time when someone may or may not even be paying full attention, like they used to maybe watch a show, but now it's kind of an ambient experience. I'm curious what you guys think about how people are consuming it start to back propagate and almost start to change what the story is and how the story is told.
I mean, from my perspective, because this is my sweet spot. I don't want to piss off the people running this conference, but I think voice is the tip of the iceberg.
Yep.
Voice is the foreground experience that grabs your attention. definitely needed. But without what you're talking about, these sort of ambient experiences, think about how we function in our lives as human beings. We function in our lives as with foreground, midground, and background sound. The foreground sound kind of is the more, analytical stuff that you need to know. The background sound is the thing that gets you, like, make sure you don't get hit by the car. Or make sure that when you turn the deadbolt, you know you're safe. So we have to utilize these technologies in a way, we have to meet the people where they are. We're not going to retrain people how to connect with the world. So I don't know about you, but I have 4 Alexas in my house. When I have 4 people using Alexas, it drives me crazy because people are constantly doing different content and having conversations, and it all is fighting each other. What if there's a semiotics of visuals, stop sign, you can identify that 100 miles away, because you can see it coming and you can see the red and the shape around the outside. But what about the semiotics of sound in these experiences? It should be not voice, but really scoring experiences or sound experiences or something, or sound first experiences.
I think one of the most interesting things about entertainment being everywhere is how that, you go back and you look at 10 years ago, people were like, streaming video, there's going to be webisodes. People are going to be watching all of this 8-minute short content. Except what streaming video really allowed was people to watch 10 hours of a Netflix series, right? It was like, if you look at that time and you're like, yeah, in the future, everybody's going to sit around and watch 10 hours of a television show in one weekend. It would have been crazy. But as a result of all of this kind of disposable stuff being everywhere, the importance of things that somebody can really dive deep into have taken a more significant cultural significance.
Well, you're giving control to the user. It's, I think there's this big shift. I think voice moves the ownership from the creator to the consumer. I think it's happened in almost other form of media. You look at Hulu or Netflix, again, they took what was a broadcaster or producer-controlled experience and put it to a consumer-controlled experience. And when you make that shift, the diversity of experiences, the diversity of stories, the diversity of content, or even the diversity of time spent changes hugely. I don't know, what have you guys seen in terms of binging behavior and stuff like that when you let someone be in control?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to this. So I think there's a number of things. Obviously, in broadcast TV, content availability is a big thing. But we do see these trends of users constantly going back to the same content. And more we've noticed there's a very small number of shows that customers are watching and they're continuing to watch it. And I think voice as one step, but also just understanding in our UI to reflect that new behavior and make it easier for somebody to find that. And voice is a great avenue into personalization. We think a lot about how we put your content throughout your home. And we do a lot at Comcast to try and make your content available in your living room and on your mobile device, in your bedroom, everywhere. But it's really, voice provides such a nice avenue to go straight to what you want. One of the great examples we have is, if you were to type in Mickey Mouse Clubhouse for your kid on the TV using the remote, I think it's upwards of 60 key presses to get that in to try and find your content. And Comcast runs an ad to that effect, that it used to be so painful to do that, and a remote control is not really the best input device there. So now all of a sudden you have your voice and you can describe it. And now we're starting to get really smart, or at least a little bit smarter, and a lot of the great work that Jan and his team are doing, that you don't even need to know the exact name of the show anymore. You can describe what you want. The episode where something happens, or a movie with an actor. So all of a sudden, it's what the customer understands they want instead of what the title of the program is. And I think that opens up just such a nice avenue to be able to find what you're looking for.
And one nice connection to that is we talked a lot about immersion, right? I mean, the thing we love about books is that we can get lost in books, right? And that's where the binging comes in. But also voice and expressing what people are interested in. There's that nice feedback loop that you can give back to the content creators, right? Of what, if you describe the scenes that matter to you, And like we work closely with our colleagues at NBC to create more of these kind of immersive experiences of where we look at kind of what are people trying to do with voice, right? Because you're not limited in the scope of things that you're kind of expressing, right? What you would like to get out of the TV. And so like one of the things we saw was for the show The Voice, that you can actually use the voice to vote for people, right? Instead of having to call or SMS, or like voice would allow you the way you would tell, like I would tell my wife, like I want this person to win, right? And you can just say it, like, hey, this is the person I'm voting for. And it kind of really creates this more immersive experience, which we kind of were talking about, right? You becoming part of the experience, which I think is so much richer than the purely passive couch lean back experience.
Well, it's active content.
It's active content,
and
right.
As opposed to just a broadcast.
Right.
And that's changing it. Inherently, voice is a interactive medium. I think one of the things that I talk a lot about with my team is I don't think someone wants to sit there and talk to a smart speaker all day long. That takes a lot of work. It's not a great conversation right now. It can't hold a conversation very well. But people want to get what I think you guys have proven that so much with the voice. They want to get to what they want, and they want to use that to get it out of the way. And then maybe they might want to steer the experience, but they don't necessarily want to sustain the experience through voice.
And I think you touched on a really interesting point. I don't know, show of hands here. Does anybody have X1 at home? I don't know how big of a Comcast footprint audience we have here. But yeah, we got a couple. But one thing you'll notice if you do try out the voice remote on X1 is, unlike Alexa or Google or Siri, the Comcast voice remote doesn't have a voice. It doesn't have a personality. It doesn't talk back to you. And so you ask it to do something, and it does it, and it puts you there on the screen. It, returns what you asked for. And that was a very deliberate product decision we made to focus on really the utility of the product. And so where we could have spent dev cycles to have sort of that friendly banter, I think it's really paid off in terms of functionality, where because we know we always have this primary TV screen, to just dive right into that experience.
See, what's amazing about what you're just pointing out is voice as a search tool is awesome. For the most part, voice in terms of feedback sucks. What you give is you give voice as a search, and you get emotion back. I get to watch the content I love, so I get that rewarding experience, whereas the vast majority of skills right now don't have any kind of emotional feedback. You get the information, you move on, it's a utility. And to your point, that's why you don't engage with it very much. And I think until people start realizing, whoa, this amazing new medium for storytelling, for making people feel something, for carrying them through moment to moment on something that might be more meaningful to them or more meaningful interaction. It's this awesome creative tool. And we have to focus on the creative opportunities in all these technologies in terms of how we get the feedback.
There were some incredible findings going to the thing that you said about immersion, and 13 Reasons Why, you could tell if somebody was going through the experience using voice or going through a tap. When people were using voice, their engagement was 2x, so they stayed in it twice as long as the people that were just tapping through it. And some of the anecdotes about how real they felt that it was, it's FaceTime, so you're seeing your face while you're talking to this person. In the first scene, a character tells you, okay, there's a lot of drama going on. Whatever happens, just stay out of it. So we're doing users testing with the Consumer Insights group, and we watch somebody do it. And she's like, oh yeah, I'll stay out of it. And then the next call comes in, and she's like, she answers the call, and then does the rest of the experience like this. And we asked her after the fact, why were you doing that? And she was like, well, Tony's a guy that I really respect, and he asked me to stay out of it, and I told him I would stay out of it, and I didn't want there to be any evidence that I didn't, because I didn't want him to find out. Let that sink in for a second.
That thing about immersion is such an important, and actually, if you don't mind, I have a quick example and some data to throw behind it.
Yeah.
So, we just as an experiment, as a thought, we work with this company called Sentient Decision Science, which does all this really amazing subconscious research. And our question was, hey, if we take existing Alexa skills, buying a movie ticket, turning the lights on and off in your house, third one is going through a step-by-step process and accomplishing something, taking a stain out of your shirt. And what if we score those experiences? and then we put them in front of users. So I'll just give you the example of one of these, which was the movie experience. Let's see if I can play this. So the existing experience is like movies comes up. What movies are playing? List. So it's a very transactional kind of approach. I'm not calling out any names. So what we decided to do was to score that experience. So when you say movies, here's what you hear. Let's see if it'll play. I've got to turn the phone back on. That'll do it. Somebody else say something while I get this going on.
So I've had some incredible experiences doing live demos.
Yeah.
Well, that was good.
The one thing you
Okay, let's try this again. Let's see if this plays this time. So if you say movies, come on.
Your mic's up higher.
Can you guys hear this? Could you guys hear that? Let me try one more time so if I can play it a little closer to the mic. Can you hear that? Yeah. It's a little soft. It kind of sounds like you're at the movies, right? It kind of gives you a sense, like a little bit of feedback loop, a little bit of satisfaction that you've accomplished something. And then there's another sound when you buy the ticket, like a little sound of success. So anyway, we did that for all three of those experiences. The data that Sentient came back was, people said, and there's two really interesting things. Now I can't turn it off. The two things they said were really interesting was 37 to 42% of people said the experience was easier or more enjoyable. Like without even knowing that we were talking about the sound. And the other thing was something like 48% of people said it was quicker with the sound. So it's like what it did in some ways is fill in the latency, give you some kind of a sense that something has happened, that you were successful. So I mean, like look, we're not the only people who do this. There are other people who can do this too. But I think the point is we have to think about serving people emotionally, not just in terms of tactics of accomplishing things.
Well, I think that transitions to kind of the last kind of couple questions I want to ask is, so what's next? What do we do? So we found out that adding emotion and adding feedback, making sure it's iterative, understanding who the user is, what the content is. So what do we do next? What type of content should we create? What type of story should we be telling? How do we make sure it's sustainable for both users and creators?
Well, I'd like to hear from this audience eventually. I know you're going to open it up.
Yep.
But you know, when I come out of the movies, the first thing I want to do is start talking about, oh, that was better than the original, or don't make any more sequels to this, or I'm going to come back and see this again. So I want to express myself in voice, and if I have a way to do that, if I call a friend and do that. Otherwise, I'm going to Twitter and fooling around with the hashtags and getting lost in everything. But for the future, what I would like to see is a way for all the folks coming out of those movies to have a giant conversation and have that conversation be structured and reflected back at you, so that you can see your own contributions, your own feedback, complete that feedback loop that I think is currently missing from a lot of our digital and so-called interactive communication.
Yeah, it becomes more human that way too.
Well, I think the example on television of the most full voice experience is Westworld. That you're going into this world, you're talking to these people, they're talking to you, they care about you, but it's all talking. Like all of the feelings that are exchanged, they're all exchanged through voice. And that's the future that I see it all going to.
I mean, one thing I find interesting is like when we talked about sound as a communication device, right? We like to express what we want. Voice is very efficient, right? It's kind of like the best communication medium that we have. But for really kind of evoking like a rich description of what you want to feel, like sound, smell, things like that really come into play too. So, right, what I'm kind of curious about is like what kind of patterns will we change via technology? Like, for example, now when we do podcasting even, like a lot of us listen to podcasts at 1.5 or 2 times speed, right? Which something is we wouldn't talk to another person like that, but if we want to consume, we change it that way because this is right for us, right?
I don't know, in New York we might, but.
But so I'm really curious to see like what are the new ways of like that we will consume communication or information or richer experiences. And also then, given that we still want to and communicate with other people, how does that kind of affect that again, right? Because communication started as communication between people, not these kind of talked about the changes, kind of the mass medium, right? And what is the inverse effects?
Yeah, I think there's, for any voice designers out there, there's a lot of wisdom in that in terms of if you're working with voice actors, make them talk fast. Because we've seen with engagement on different interactions that when characters are talking faster, there's higher engagement.
Yeah. Well, that's actually one of the things I wanted to do is kind of talk about some of the things we've all learned, experiences, successes, and failures we've gone through. I was going to actually comment on one of those. The difference of when you're designing an experience, you're in there, you're listening to it, you're trying to listen through every word, and everything you are in such a audition mode is kind of what we refer to internally. When you're listening so intently, but the reality is a user doesn't care nearly as much as you do. So the difference of real world usage of voice and media and entertainment versus studio versus auditioning versus all this stuff is so different. Speed is a big thing because when you're, oh, well, they didn't pronounce that, it doesn't matter, you know. So that was kind of one thing that a big thing, many failures internally before we figured it out is that we actually have to design for someone who's only half paying attention, not fully present. Or when you're like showing it to a client that like awkwardly sitting at a conference table playing something and everyone's like, sounded good, you know. It's that really kind of awkward thing, but that's something that I think we really learned is you have to make it real and put it in a real world. Like ask someone to be like walking around doing something while they're listening to it versus actually sitting there intensely talking to their smart speaker and that experience.
And you have the 15-second skip back, right?
Yeah.
If you ever want to really listen to it again, you just press a button and it will be there, right?
I mean, if you look at just podcasting as an example, so there are certain podcasts that are relatively successful that just tell you about really interesting stuff.
Yep.
And I don't know if you're familiar with Wondery and some of the podcasts they have, but their whole, the Wondery sound is something that they put a lot of time and attention to, which is about creating immersive experiences. So I wonder, you know, it'd be really, no pun intended. I'm sort of curious, you know, it might be a really interesting research study to do to take these examples. Do you have to talk quickly or do you have to engage people? And sometimes you can engage people, like I think the Westworld thing, I don't know how fast they were talking, but if you love Westworld, you want to hear more about that story. If there's cliffhangers built in, you want to find out what's next. So we have to continually, I think, focus on that immersive storytelling. And you were asking about the future.
Yeah.
I think the future piece to me, look, it's a little scary because we don't know where it is, but I think it's, look, I mean, if you back up and say music and sound, or essentially sound overall, we respond to that quicker than any other sense, even touch. Yep. So because of that, biologically. So again, designing for humans. So what does that actually mean in a multi-sensory experience you're talking about before? It means that sound essentially is the arbiter of all our other senses in a multi-sensory experience. We experience the music and sound first, and the voice first. And if anything else doesn't connect with that, we tune it out. It's confusing, next channel, whatever it is. But I think the future is really around the next level is AI. So whether it's, we were talking before about, you know, if you have RFID tags and some technology is positionally aware, or somehow the AI experience, the AI knows what's going on contextually, and we can deliver things to people and they don't have to ask for them, that's definitely the next level of it, which again can be a little scary and there's privacy concerns. I can tell you one hardcore example, which is future of entertainment when you think about theme parks. Next generation of theme parks is they got to get people out of the vehicles. We've been in vehicles for 30 years, 40 years. So when you get people out of the vehicles and you start having positionally aware attractions, what's possible? You can score a live, score around people. You can give them opportunities, give them the illusion of the infinite decision tree in a story. That's where we need to go.
So basically on the way to Westworld?
Yeah.
Well, we need a little bit of boundaries, I think, so we don't quite get to Westworld. Yeah.
One just like really basic design thing that we learned in terms of A/B testing is one of the most important things to somebody having a good experience is over clarity up front about what's expected of them. Because when you talk and the game or the experience does what you're trying to do, then there's a feedback loop of positivity. And every time because people are coming into voice insecure. They don't have a lifetime of experiencing it. They have 10 years of yelling at Delta or Chase or whatever and them not understanding, and that's their starting point. And every time they have a positive experience of just, should I do this or do this? And then it does that, they build confidence. And so the more confident they become, the more they enjoy it. And the most important thing in just designing single experiences for building that confidence is making it very, very clear up front what's expected of the user and what they need to do to succeed at each interaction.
Such a great point. I don't know if anybody else here, I was on Apple for a long time and I just could never get Siri to work properly. Switched over to Android. The Android search, just voice and being able to dictate works pretty damn well. I never used it with Apple. I kind of gave up on the Apple phone, even though there were a lot of the cool things, just for the voice feature.
And the funny thing about that is that they probably perform exactly the same. But you were using the other one at a different point in its performance curve.
Maybe. Although it doesn't work well on my iPad either.
Yeah, on the note of expectations, I do think it's really important. One thing that we found through experience is there's a number of really intuitive features for voice controlling your TV that people just pick up the remote and use. And that's awesome because we've solved a problem for them. But there's a lot of really useful things we can do to solve problems for our customers that they don't know about. And I think with any skill that you're building, you have that challenge about how do you communicate the value to your customers. A great example that we have on X1 is you can actually ask your voice remote for your Wi-Fi password if Comcast is also your internet provider. And that's great for customers who don't need to look on the back of their modem to find it or dig up the post-it. They don't need to call us, whatever it is. It's a really great experience for them. It's saving us money for the odd time that, or really more often than we'd like, that somebody's calling us to get that information. But nobody was doing it. And you know, we sort of learned the hard way. Customers definitely don't like us popping things up on the screen to try and educate them. That was a mistake that you know, we had to get rid of a lot of notifications and contextual things like that because they just don't care when they're trying to watch their show. But we found our TV screensaver was a fantastic way. And we started putting these voice tips up there. And you know, in some cases, we were seeing commands that had hardly any usage jump, you know, 400 or 500x just by putting it out there in a way that customers can passively notice on their own time and really seeing sustained usage of those.
Yeah, I think that touches on one of the biggest problems, which is discovery. When you have something that's blind and there are 150,000 things you could do with another 10 permutations each, you have millions of opportunities to interact with these devices. It's always one of the biggest things looking forward, that you could make the best experience in the world, but if nobody knows about it, it's useless. So it's almost like that's something that I wanted to see, of kind of like, again, thinking forward, how do we start to solve some of those discovery programs? Is it cross-promotion? Is it there's kind of the traditional ways, using, if the voice has a program, they can tell, hey, ask your voice remote to do this. You can promote that and you can actually, you have a platform for it. But I think this is always something that developers are thinking about, content creators, media, how do you get people to discover the experience?
I think part of that is trust, right? I mean, you have to basically build trust, or the customers have to develop trust in your ability to serve them answers, right? To be able to understand you. And I think one thing which will help a lot is, and right now, a lot of the interactions are very much one turn or 2-3 turn interactions, like if you schedule a reminder, something which is very structured. I think when we get to like really more free-form dialogue, where I can go back and say, hey, I understand what you're getting at, but maybe not completely and don't quite know what to do yet, and then ask you for clarification, and kind of thereby, similar when you tell me something that I don't understand, it's like, could you repeat that again and rephrase it, right? So it is not necessarily then something where you say, hey, I don't know what you're talking about. It's really, it becomes a conversation, right? And I think that's kind of the next big step to address discovery, to kind of guide like the user of the voice interface to the kind of domain that you can handle, but do it in a way that it really becomes a large funnel rather than something where, like, where do I go next, right? Or I don't know how to.
You know, the opposite challenge, the different challenge, you guys have a user base. So if you're going to watch TV, you're going to have contact with your, so discovery for you is about discovering content out. But the other thing, you know, if there were a media company represented here, because we work with those people all the time, what they say is, you know, there are 300,000 Alexa skills out in the world, and there's a handful that people use. And what they're trying to figure out is when they do something new and they don't have a captive user base, how are they going to get that discovery? And I don't think people have really cracked that yet. I mean, again, the portal people are going to win. Apple's going to decide, Amazon's going to decide. When you say movies, who delivers the movie experience? So I think that's a really, really critical thing for entertainment that has not been cracked yet, is discovery.
Yeah, and it's something we think a lot about as a company.
One good point about that from the creation side is that you also need to change the level of metadata that you provide for assets, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to make yourself discoverable via kind of general questions, right? Just having simple tags where I, as a user, would have to know that specific tag to and remember it to bring up your content, that's just not sufficient anymore. Right? You really have to be contextual, personalized, and content providers need to kind of enable those rich descriptions in ways that then enable voice to be able to ask for it and understand it.
Because you have all the content coming in, you need as much information about it and consistency as possible.
Right.
Because every one of those output devices is slightly different, how they search, how they surface, how they handle discovery. So you have to think holistically about voice overall, not just for Amazon or for Google or for Apple or for Bixby or for how many more are going to come out that are actually going to be mass market. So I want to make sure we open up some time for some questions from the audience here. So we have about 10 more minutes. So does anyone have any questions or things they wanted to bring up and go about the world of media?
I was really fascinated by your comment about the sounds and the interaction that people experienced, that it was faster and a better experience. And it reminds me of Furby. And people connected to Furby, and there's that Iodo dog that people bury them. They have funeral services for things that don't speak back, but you can speak to them. And I'm wondering if we're missing an interconnection by focusing on the speech back as opposed to maybe some more nonverbal cueing.
You mean nonverbal in which direction? From the user to the product?
From the product back to the user.
Yeah. It's a great question.
Yeah, I remember that phenomenon that was interesting because people are forming an emotional relationship because it almost didn't have a language, but there was that, it was the only language was emotion with those. And that was a story you built around that, and how much of that was the creation of the owner, I guess would be of that, because that's the world that they're creating a story around, they're creating something and then they have to end that story.
So I've seen some examples of this in a bunch of design studios where really what they're looking at is game theory, gamification for adults. You know, we tend to forget that we're all still kind of kids in a lot of ways. So I think what you're pointing to is really a gamification piece in addition to kind of tapping into, you know, what we do as human beings in terms of gestures, facial movements. We were talking about this before. One of the big challenges you have, maybe you want to talk about that, but I think that's it's a really important point.
Well, this is in the virtual reality world, but the most important thing is eye contact. That we recognize faces and we understand faces better than anything. And if somebody's looking off, you're not going to believe that you're really there with them.
You got a question up front here?
Hey guys, great panel, by the way. So I got just two things I wanted to ask. One thing I just wanted to, it's an observation that I've been making on what could potentially happen with the voice technology, and I just want to get your take on it, which is, do you think that some aspects of literature and, you know, just the written word, what kind of ramifications would happen to that once the voice goes even further, you know, because our reading is already like at an all-time low, and what does that do for us as human beings in terms of the future? And the other thing is, do you guys see in the future a sort of specific language that would maybe develop from voice? In other words, instead of me saying, turn the lights on, blah, 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 there's just one word that means that, and so that like it keeps, so that we get to that place even faster. And do you think that that will eventually happen, or is that already something? Anyway.
So you're talking about like emojis of voice?
I mean, I have a point of view on the second, not the first. The first is too big for my brain. But the second is a little bit what I was talking about the technology has to meet the humans where we are. So the best universal language of sound that we have for communication is really those semiotics of sound. You know what a door close means. You know what a lock means. It means safety and security. You know what certain kinds of sounds are rewarding sounds. You know that. I think if we expect people to learn the technologies, it's a tremendous friction, barrier to entry. I mean, one of the nice things about what Comcast is doing is it meets you where you are. They're trying to get smarter and smarter about being able to meet you where you are. So will there be an emoji of sound in terms of how you control devices? Not sure. Certainly it's possible, but I think it's a tremendous amount of friction around that.
Yeah, one note is that, like, I think, one of the things we always talk about is that our marketing people love the term show me. Show me movies about dogs. Show me horror movies. But if you actually just pick up the remote and say horror movies, we're going to return the same thing. So I think a lot of it is really in our understanding of the language and of our domains, where we have a great understanding at Comcast about video and entertainment. We have a very detailed catalog of movies and things. So we can just understand that and take you there. Same thing, you don't need to ask your voice remote with a guard word to arm your house. You can just say, set the alarm, and we'll do that. So I think some of it is really in the breadth versus the depth of the assistant you're talking to. Because obviously the more capabilities you have, the more ambiguous your query could become. Whereas when you're focused on fewer domains, like we are, you can eliminate a lot of those guard words and get right to what you're looking for with a very concise utterance.
I mean, one thing just to add to that, like I like the way you described like using emojis as a means of efficient communication, right? So a lot of the how we think about voice is in general more like natural language expression, right? Even via typing, and really think like for some in the customer service world, like if we have a chat and people use like keyboards or they now just use their phones, they often use emojis in the chat communications with us. Right, and so we need to understand emojis and the emotional significance of them when they communicate with us to understand like where are you coming from, what's your current state, right? Is there a sentiment towards us and what you're describing? And so I think that is like one way where we shortcut voice again to something that is more precise to kind of describe that emotional component in a kind of more precise way.
Talking to the mic.
Sorry, I was almost thinking as you were talking about that, like kind of the emoji, the way you articulated it, would be an even more wild idea is kind of, with the face recognition technology. Imagine if I'm laying in bed and I want the lights to turn off, as like a cute thing or whatever. Right. Instead of me saying, I just do like as if I'm yawning, and it like gets that that's what I want. I don't know.
And there will probably be like similar how we communicate in different ways, right? I mean, one of the big examples about like if we want to give directions, we're usually better at pointing. Like if you're in the room, I can point you to where rather than say you turn so and so many degrees to the left and then you walk right. So voices might not be the right thing for that, and so gestures are more efficient. And likely eventually, especially when we talk about immersive environments, like using kind of all the different ways of communication is the most powerful one. And when your home becomes an immersive, both from an kind of input as well as output environment, I think we really want to utilize everything to express your voice, but it's not just your audio voice. Right?
I think what you're referring to is probably more like an Easter egg or a hack, ultimately.
I think we have time for one more question before we're done.
I think we're
Done. Can we do one quick thing I wanted to run down with everyone is, what is the kind of one thing that you're either most looking forward to or most scared about how voice is going to change storytelling and media, let's say in the next year?
So sometime in the next year, the Get User Media API is going to be included in WebKits. So inside of Snapchat, Instagram, you can do the same things that you could do on mobile Safari, and then that'll enable microphones for third-party developers.
That's both scary and exciting.
Two scary things for me are making sure we have guardrails on AI. And I think that the second scary thing is until we sort out the immersive content that matters to people, the fragmentation of our attention is going to get tighter and tighter and tighter, and it feels like a zero-sum game.
I guess the scary thing for me will be that I'll end up talking to robots, and when I say agent, 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 no human person ever comes on.
Probably the scary thing is that looking at the kind of metrics that consumption of entertainment is currently optimizing for, which is more and more and more consumption, kind of what does that to us, and like kind of what content makes us more engaged and wanting to watch more, right? Which we see always leads us in the right direction. And then at the same time, I'm very excited about the potential of really being able to not kind of getting frustrated of not finding something to watch, because you can express it in such rich ways that you actually always get something.
Yeah, I think I'm just really excited about the prospect of not needing to worry about losing my remote control anymore. I think, voice is so powerful, and we're really just, on the tip of the iceberg in terms of, changing the things that we have and that we interact with.
I think one of the things I'm most excited about in the next year is people being able to get access to the content that they care about, that they want in the context that makes sense for them. I think we've always had access to content, but it's always in the wrong place or in the wrong format or in the wrong time. So I think that's the thing I'm most excited about. But I think to kind of sum up, I think it's really interesting to see how people are evolving, how storytelling is evolving, and how this medium has given so much power to the consumer. And now we have to react as content creators and as media companies to this new medium. We can't force something. You can't push in voice. It is a pull-based medium, so it's so interesting to see something that is truly derived from a user's desires and a user's interest, as opposed to what a media company or a platform is going to decide what's going to go out. So I think that's the most exciting thing in so much of what we've talked about. And thanks so much for having us here.
Thank you. Let's give it up for the panel.